This is Arthur, a tyrannical king who ruled the entire world with an iron fist. On his path to the throne, he slaughtered his enemies, destroyed cities, and committed countless, innumerable disasters, all for the sake of power and nothing else. But one day, he began to think about what he had done. The memories assaulted him, and a sense of guilt began to destroy him. Suddenly, he had a heart attack and died while drowning in darkness. He heard a voice speaking to him, saying that he would be given a second chance, but this time he must seek the light. After a moment, Arthur opened his eyes and found two people standing in front of him, looking at him. The man told him that his name was Reynolds, and that this was his father, and the second was named Alice, and this was his mother. Of course, they didn't expect him to understand anything because he was just a child, but they were very happy with him. Arthur realized that these people were indeed his family, and that he had been reborn. From 1 minute ago, he still couldn't believe he was a child again, but at the same time, he couldn't deny that his parents cared for him deeply, which made him happy. There was also something else he couldn't stand. This small body he was trapped in, and that he couldn't speak. Every now and then, he would get frustrated with himself, feeling like he had lost control of everything, my friend. But amidst all this, he saw something stranger than his own situation. He saw Reynolds gathering energy in his hand and shattering a giant rock with a single blow. Arthur was shocked because he had never seen this kind of power before, even though he was the ruler of the world. What had happened was clearly a great achievement, so Reynolds became proud of himself and looked at his family, expecting praise. Unfortunately, he forgot to look around. The rock fell right on his head. Alice had anticipated something like this might happen, so she ran to him and began healing him with magic. But she told him to be careful next time, especially when he wants to show off. It's true Reynolds liked to joke, but when he gets serious, his hand doesn't joke. He can kill a wild boar with a single blow, and this makes his life and the lives of the people with him much easier. When he finished the hunting trip, he returned home excited to get a hug from his family. Arthur learned two things from all this. First, this world is very dangerous to the extent that ordinary people walk around armed, and secondly, if he wants to live freely here, he must learn to fight. When Reynolds returned, Alice said it was nap time. Although Arthur didn't like being treated like a child, this moment of sleep was something he truly loved. In his previous life, he never slept comfortably. He was always afraid of assassination attempts, even in his sleep. Of course, he could deal with them, but the tension was killing him. Months passed, and Arthur's body began to strengthen enough for him to move on his own. The first thing he did was crawl to the mirror and look at himself very carefully. His parents thought this was cute behavior from a child, but he was trying to comprehend that this was indeed his face now. Since he could now move during the next nap time, he decided to start implementing his plan. He crawled quietly on the floor. Alice was busy in the kitchen and didn't notice at all until he reached the other side of the room. He opened the cupboard door, pulled out a book, and began to read to learn more about the world around him. He discovered that the continent he was on is called Deccan and is divided into 3 kingdoms. The Kingdom of Darkness, which belongs to the dwarves living in huge cities inside caves. The Kingdom of Eleanor, which belongs to the elves living inside forests. And the Kingdom of Spain, the human kingdom ruled by a king. But none of them destroyed cities to gain control like Arthur did in the past, because rule here is by inheritance. Arthur was still curious to know more, so he opened a second book, and this book finally began to answer some important questions that were on his mind. He had noticed that the level of technology in this world was somewhat backward, and the reason for this was the existence of magic. People here rely on magic, which works by manipulating an energy called mana that exists inside their bodies. Magic isn't very widespread, but it plays a big role in people's lives. There are 2 main ways to use it. The first method is called enhancement, which relies on the person concentrating the mana, giving them superhuman strength, speed, and high defense. The second method is evocation, which allows the person to bring the mana out of their body and control it in anything around them, like fire, or water, or others. This information made the picture clearer for him, but he still hadn't found anything about the type of healing magic Alice had used before, so he assumed it was a special case. Not everyone could do that. He also learned that for most people, mana begins to appear when they reach puberty, and then they can control it through something called a mana core. If they can control it well, they can become real mages. For him, this was very easy to understand because, in his past life, he relied on an energy called Kai, which worked in almost the same way. So he decided to try to concentrate all his energy and see if he could cause a reaction. And indeed, his mana core began to form. This was a very good step for him. But before he could continue his training, Alice finally arrived. She was terrified when she found he wasn't in his bed, and when she finally found him, she began to calm down. But in her embrace at that moment, something strange happened. Arthur became tense and thought she had felt the guilt inside him. But the truth was that she just smelled him because he had had an accident again. 2 years passed. Alice was sitting writing in her diary, happy that Arthur was growing up and had become healthy. But something bothered her. Since Arthur was born, he had never smiled once. But at that moment, she saw Reynolds teaching Arthur how to use a sword, and Arthur looked excited. But Alice went crazy. How can you give a 2-year-old a stick that's like a toy? Arthur now knew that when Alice gets angry, the world turns upside down, and he found out who was in charge in this house. Apparently, all the women in this world are like that. After a while, Alice decided to take a walk in the city, and Arthur was very excited because it was a great opportunity to gather information himself about the world he was in. He could assess the level of technology from the weapons people were buying, and saw things he had never seen before. The best thing was that he saw a mage using fire magic right in front of him. The day was very useful for him, but in the end, his small body was tired and he was struggling to stay awake. When they returned home, Alice wanted to put him to sleep immediately. Although this new life made him feel like he couldn't do everything, he began to love this life because for the first time, he felt the tenderness of a mother and father. In his past life, Arthur was an orphan. No one was with him, and he was raised in an orphanage. He never felt genuine affection from his parents, so this life was a very beautiful change for him. The next day, Arthur was standing by the window, watching Reynolds train in the garden. He was very interested in seeing how magic was applied in practice, and began to follow all of Reynolds' movements as he concentrated mana in his body. What he saw of his father's strength excited him, and he decided to go down to train. But as he was about to start, Alice said, "Come on, honey, it's nap time." Arthur still couldn't speak, so he started whining as he passed by the bookcase, wanting to read a book. But Alice said there was no time now. Normally, Arthur wouldn't have been able to do anything, but recently he discovered a legendary move, the innocent face. And indeed, Alice said, "Fine. Take this book and sit for a while, and then you'll sleep." As soon as he was alone, he began to practice magic. Over 2 years, he managed to master it. He managed to gather the mana inside his body and form a complete mana core. The process was very difficult, but the result was worth it. With a little more concentration, he would be able to use his first spell. But the problem was that Arthur couldn't control his power and used more mana than necessary, blowing up the entire house. "You son of a bitch!" Alice and Reynolds were outside at the time of the explosion. The blow was so strong that Reynolds' back was badly burned while protecting Alice, but both were okay. Afterwards, they remembered that Arthur was still inside the house. They ran at full speed, and as soon as Reynolds entered the study, he was shocked. Arthur was standing in the middle of the house, 100% intact, and nothing had happened to him. And he was the source of the explosion? A child who hadn't even turned 3 yet and could use magic at that level? Magic isn't supposed to work before the age of 12 anyway. Arthur was standing proudly in front of his parents, but he forgot that the house was collapsing on their heads. Some wood from the ceiling was about to fall on him, and he tried to run, but it was too late. Fortunately, Alice and Reynolds flew to him. Alice used her body to protect him, and Reynolds blocked the wood with his magic. Arthur was shocked. This was the first time anyone had sacrificed their life for him, and Alice was crying because she was relieved he was okay. This scene made Arthur cry too. In his previous life, he was a king who was supposed to be harsh and not know mercy. For example, once, someone tried to assassinate him, and after he was captured, the council gathered to decide his fate. They were going to send his wife and son to a camp that conducted experiments and tortured them. The man kept begging Arthur to spare his wife and son, but Arthur, instead of agreeing, killed them on the spot and said, "This is more merciful than what they would have been subjected to." But now, instead of spending his days executing people, he spends them training with his father. Reynolds asked him to try his gloves, but Arthur said, "No, I've decided to use a sword instead." Reynolds decided to humor him and said, "Okay, we'll train with swords, but I'll use one that I enhance with mana." Surprisingly, Arthur performed the same move and cut his father's sword with ease. At that moment, Reynolds realized that Arthur was excessively gifted and there was no other solution. He needed a professional trainer. He returned home and told Alice, but she refused immediately, saying, "I won't send my son to another city to learn. We agreed that you would teach him to fight and I would teach him magic." But Reynolds saw that this boy wasn't normal. He cut a sword infused with Reynolds' mana. Reynolds thought it wasn't far-fetched that he might become one of the strongest people in the future, which is why he told Alice that he must have a good teacher to teach him properly. She didn't deny that her son was indeed talented, but she wasn't comfortable letting him go alone. Far from her. So the two of them started arguing, and neither could convince the other. Arthur was annoyed by this argument, so he simply said to them, "Well, why don't you come with me to the city instead of leaving me there alone?" And then the two looked at each other as if they were hearing this idea for the first time and said, "This boy is really a genius. A genius." The next day, a large carriage came to take them, and they were going to travel with some of their old friends, the ones Arthur knew from before because they helped Alice and Reynolds rebuild the house after Arthur blew it up. These people formed a team together, and their leader was named Adam, who introduced himself to Arthur. After him, Angel introduced herself as well, and this is Diran. Arthur then noticed a girl standing on the carriage. This girl doesn't talk, so the others told Arthur that her name is Jasmine. As for the last one in the team, it is Helen. After they finished the introductions, they all boarded the carriage and began moving towards the city. As they were moving, Alice asked Arthur if he was happy because this was his first long trip. Arthur said yes, but inside he was saying to himself, "Oh my god, people here still ride horse-drawn carriages? In my old world, I had a fleet of flying cars." After a long day of travel, they decided to take a break. But as they were setting up camp, a group of goblins attacked them. The team finished them off very easily. Arthur watched, mesmerized, because it was the first time he had seen real combat. He said to himself that he must become strong enough to face this danger himself, and since they now had a decent amount of meat, they decided to grill it and have it for dinner. In the middle of the camp, Alice noticed that Reynolds' arm was a bit injured, so she flew over to heal him. But Jasmine told her to wait a moment. All the people gathered around her to watch the mana because magical healers are very rare in this world, and if anyone saw Alice using this magic, she could become a target for them. As soon as she finished, everyone went back to what they were doing. But Adam decided to train a bit with Arthur. He had heard about Arthur's strength and wanted to see it for himself. Adam charged his spear with mana and told Arthur to get ready. Arthur did the same and charged his energy. As soon as the fight began, Arthur cast magic into his legs and ran at high speed towards Adam, then disappeared and appeared in front of Adam in an instant. It was a very impressive move, and he could have hit him with a strong blow, but his leg gave way and he fell. They began exchanging blows. Arthur was thrown into the air because his body was light, and before he could hit the ground, the team caught up and started yelling at Adam, telling him to take it easy, he's still a child. But Adam said he couldn't control himself and said the boy is very strong and that he couldn't control his strikes. Surely Reynolds had trained him with monsters. But in truth, Arthur hadn't learned these moves from anyone. He taught himself. Suddenly, Jasmine came up behind him, and the boy was startled. She was very impressed by what he did in the fight and asked him if he could teach her how he does the move where he uses magic in his legs. It seems Jasmine wasn't planning to leave him alone, and from the look in her eye, it was clear she would keep pestering him until he agreed, so he would probably end up having to teach her. The next day, the journey continued as they had planned, and they took a few breaks along the way to rest. During one of these breaks, Adam began to teach Arthur about using the spear, and Helen showed him how to use the bow. Arthur had no experience with weapons other than the sword from his previous life, so these lessons were very useful for him. The next day, Jasmine gave him a dagger as a thank you gift for teaching her his tactic, and it was very clear that she had started to like him, especially since she wasn't the type to get attached to people easily. A moment later, everyone boarded the carriages and continued on their way. But as they were moving, they were suddenly attacked by a group of bandits and found themselves completely surrounded. The leader of the gang ordered his men to kidnap the women and children to sell them as slaves, and indeed, they all attacked at once. The adventurers tried to defend themselves as best they could. The team's strength, along with Reynolds, was much higher than any individual bandit, but their numbers were very large, and it was clear they would be overpowered in the end. Suddenly, Reynolds was thrown onto one of the carriages from the force of a blow he took from the gang leader, and he was badly injured. Alice tried to go heal him, but he told her to stay away because if the gang found out about her power, they would start targeting her. He asked Arthur to take her and escape quickly. Arthur didn't want to leave him, but Reynolds told him that Alice was pregnant and that he must protect her at any cost and that he would be a big brother. Arthur understood when Reynolds gave him the signal. He began preparing his magic to escape with her. Reynolds kept fighting to buy them time to escape. Despite his injuries, he ordered his men to chase after them, but Reynolds stood in front of them with all his strength. This time, Reynolds was fighting for his family and wasn't going to give up easily. At the moment when some of the smaller gang members tried to attack Arthur and Alice, they threw knives at them and opened the path so Arthur could escape with her. Everyone was trying to protect Arthur, and he was doing the impossible to get Alice to a safe place. Strangely, in his previous life, he would kill people without caring about their feelings, and now he was running away so as not to lose someone important in his life. After they had run for a while, Arthur thought they were finally away from the danger, but he was wrong. One of the gang members was watching them from atop the mountain and knew how to use magic, so he attacked them with a very strong spell. Arthur didn't notice until after the spell was activated, and all he could do was push Alice away and take the blow himself. The spell hit Arthur with great force, sending him flying backwards. He fell from the top of the mountain, and for a child, that was literally a certain death. But Arthur wasn't going to die alone. He remembered the dagger Jasmine had given him, took it out, and threw it at the mage. The spell hit, the dagger embedded itself in his leg, and the thread attached to it wrapped around him in an instant. Arthur pulled the mage with him as they both fell from the mountain. The adventurers who were behind him tried to reach him with magic, but unfortunately, it was too late, and there was no hope of reaching him as he fell. Arthur began to recall his life, and although he knew he was going to die, he felt a strange sense of peace inside because he finally understood the meaning of sacrificing for those you love. Arthur had sacrificed himself to protect Alice and hadn't even thought twice about it. And although he wasn't regretful, he wished he could stay alive longer, but this time not for power or revenge, but to live with the family he truly loved. Somehow, he found himself in front of a huge monster that looked frightening, and at that moment, he began to regret coming at all. Arthur tried to attack the monster suddenly, but the monster simply swatted him into the air and said to him, "Calm down, man. I'm not evil. I just want to be your friend." But honestly, should Arthur trust him or not? Let's get to the important part. Arthur was still badly injured, and his body wouldn't recover if he didn't eat something. So the monster began picking fruits from the walls of the cave and told him to eat them, that they would help him. But Arthur didn't trust these fruits coming out of the walls at all, so he got up to try to talk his way out of this situation. But as soon as he stood up, the injury was very severe, and he heard a crack sound from his body and started crying like a little child. The monster said to him, "It's a miracle you're even alive after that fall." Arthur had a million questions he wanted to ask, but the monster said, "I won't answer anything until you eat first." After some hesitation, Arthur took the first bite, and it turned out to be very sweet, so he started eating. He hadn't eaten fruit in years. After he finished, he looked at the monster and asked him, "Do you know anything about my family?" The monster said that he couldn't leave this cave, but he had the ability to see from afar, and indeed, he opened a magical screen and showed him that his family had managed to defeat the rest of the gang, which meant they were still alive. Arthur was overjoyed and thanked the monster from the bottom of his heart. From then on, he decided to try to be friendly with the monster, especially since he would be staying here for a while. The monster's name was Sylvia, and she turned out to be very kind, contrary to her frightening appearance. Over the following days, Arthur stayed eating and resting so his wounds would heal. Sylvia kept watching over him and reassuring him. When his body began to recover, he decided to return to his family, but Sylvia told him it was impossible for him to return alone. "We are now on the outskirts of the elf forest, and this place is full of magical monsters, bandits, and your level isn't enough to survive here." But that didn't mean he would stay here forever. Sylvia had the ability to open a portal to send him back to a safe place, but this would take some time. Until the portal was ready, Arthur decided to work on himself. He began training with his stick as if it were a sword. He spent a few days and began to enjoy Sylvia's company, though he still didn't know much about her, except that she was kind, looked scary, and was hiding from something. After training, he sat on a rock and began to focus on his monocore. Sylvia was amazed at how a small child could use magic already and said to herself, "And he never even learned to deal with mana the right way." So she reached out her hand and began gathering a huge amount of mana while casting a spell. Arthur was mesmerized because if he could learn her method, he would truly become a supernatural warrior. But before she taught him, she asked him a question. "What will you use this power for?" For the first time, Arthur thought about it and said to her, "I want to use my power to kill anyone who tries to kill me." But Sylvia was upset by his answer and hit him on the head, knocking him backwards, and said, "I will never teach my techniques to anyone who thinks that way." Arthur didn't understand why she was upset because he thought it was natural for a person to seek revenge on those who wronged them. But clearly, Sylvia saw things completely differently. Sylvia wanted to clarify an important point, so she raised her claw to Arthur's head and said, "I could, with the simplest movement, open your skull, or I could touch you gently. You choose." Of course, Arthur didn't want to die, so he quickly chose the gentle touch. At that moment, Sylvia said to him, "Anger and hatred are much easier than anything else, but once you let them control you, your life will turn into an empty cycle of hatred and endless revenge, and that's the last thing I want Arthur to live with." So she asked him again, "What will you use this power for?" This time, Arthur thought seriously, and instead of remembering what happened to him with the gang, he remembered the laughter of his family and friends, and then he replied, "I want to use my power to protect the people I love." Sylvia was much happier with this answer, but at the same time, outside the cave, there was another monster very similar to Sylvia, and it seemed to be tracking her and was getting close to reaching her. Without much talk, the monster began to attack. Arthur wanted to help her, but he heard her voice in his head saying, "Don't worry about me." The second monster tried to convince Sylvia to go with him, threatening to kill her if she didn't, but Sylvia was prepared to die rather than listen to him. Indeed, she began to charge her mana and appeared in her true form. She was a dragon. In this form, she could use much greater power and hit him with a huge blast, but he blocked it and said to her, "You're acting foolishly. Your body can't withstand all this energy." Sylvia knew she might die, but she didn't care. She had lived a long and happy life and was ready to sacrifice herself. She managed to slam him into the wall, but he hadn't fallen yet and countered with a strong attack. Sylvia was badly damaged, but she was more concerned about Arthur than herself because the fight was getting very close to where she had hidden him. The monster delivered a final blow that would have finished her off, and she had no chance to dodge it because it would have hit Arthur. She was forced to use her last bit of strength and stop time temporarily. When time stopped, she called out to Arthur and asked him to come out. Indeed, he came out, wanting to ask her about what was happening and about her being a dragon, but there was no time. Sylvia knew time was almost up, so she opened the portal she had been preparing, but unfortunately, due to her injuries, the portal didn't reach Arthur's home and went to another strange place. She had wished to send him away from the forest because it was dangerous, but there was no other choice. Despite this, she was confident that Arthur could now rely on himself and return safely. For the last time, she asked him, "What will you use your power for?" He replied without hesitation, "To protect my family." At that moment, Sylvia smiled and felt relieved. Before Arthur left, Sylvia said she had a few things she wanted to give him. Suddenly, an egg and a feather appeared in front of him, and they were emitting a strange energy. She said to him, "Wrap this egg with the feather and take good care of it. It's a trust." When she finished speaking, She touched his arm, and suddenly, black tattoos appeared on Arthur's arms, covering his entire arm. Arthur was shocked and said, "What is this? What happened?" But Sylvia smiled and said to him in a tired voice, "You will know their meaning one day, but unfortunately, I won't be there to teach you." She paused for a moment, looked at him sadly and said, "I could have sent you back to your parents from the first day you came, but I was so happy with your presence that I couldn't let you go. But now I've put you in danger because of my selfishness." Arthur was upset by her words and said to her, "I don't care that you're a dragon. You are part of my family, and I will never forget what you did for me." She laughed with tears streaming down and said to him, "I am proud of you, Arthur, but now you must go." Before he passed through the portal, Arthur stood and looked at her, saying, "Come with me," but Sylvia smiled and said to him, "I can't. Time's up." She quickly closed the portal and sent him away. As soon as time started moving again, the monster struck Sylvia a fatal blow, and she fell to the ground. The monster wasn't convinced she was dead and began to approach her cautiously. But in the moment he got close, Sylvia gathered all her remaining energy and attacked him with a huge fire blast that burned him and everything around him. While Arthur was traveling through the portal, he heard Sylvia's voice in his ear saying, "Remember when I asked you what you will use your power for?" Arthur said, "I remember, but I am very sad." She replied, "The world is sad and full of problems, but that's why you must change it." Arthur said, "The world," Sylvia said to him. "I know, but you don't have to change it all at once. You can change it one step at a time, and you've done it before. I know about your past life, but this time, be a king with a pure heart, without hatred or oppression." After a while, Arthur woke up on the ground in the middle of the forest and decided, while holding the egg and the feather, that he would keep his promise. But before anything else, he had to get out of the forest he had been transported to. This forest was the elf forest, and there he began to walk on the path that would take him back home. Every step was filled with tension. Suddenly, he heard a very loud scream, "My friend," coming from afar, and it was clearly a young girl. Without hesitation, he gathered his energy in his leg and ran at his top speed towards the sound. As soon as he arrived, he jumped onto a high tree to get a clearer view, and from above, he was shocked by what was happening. He saw some bandits kidnapping a young elf girl who was trying to escape, but they caught her and gagged her so she wouldn't scream again. Their intention was very clear: to tie her up and sell her in the black market as a slave, and get a huge sum once they left the forest. This scene brought back old memories for him of when he and his family were attacked by bandits before, and he remembered them saying they would take him and the women to sell them. He became very angry, and the first thing he thought of was to finish them all off right now. But he remembered Sylvia's words about the importance of controlling his anger, so he tried to calm down and think rationally. He understood that any rash attack now could endanger the girl. He decided to wait for the right moment and began to follow them while hiding. He continued like this until it got dark on them, and they stopped to rest. At that moment, Arthur was hesitant. Should he continue following them until they reached a place with people, or should he attack now and finish it? But as he was watching them, he heard one of them say that he loved elves more than any other race, and Arthur knew he couldn't leave them with her for another moment. He decided he must intervene, but he had to wait for it to get darker so he could move safely. He sat down to prepare himself, knowing he might be killed today, not in self-defense, but to save this girl. When it was dark enough, he began to move. He noticed that the gang had wolves with them, chained up, and this surprised him because wolves aren't supposed to obey humans. He looked at them and found they were wearing magical collars that made them obey. At that moment, he got an idea. He took some stones and began throwing them at the wolves to anger them. They began to howl loudly. The leader told one of his men to go silence them. As soon as the man arrived, he hit the wolf on the neck. Here, Arthur found his opportunity. He descended from above and appeared behind the man, summoned a magical weapon, and finished him off in seconds. He took his weapon, and when another man came to see what was happening, Arthur jumped on him and slaughtered him too. That's two down, but his body began to tire, so he needed to finish quickly. A third man came looking for them. Arthur tried to finish him off, but the wound wasn't fatal. The man screamed and revealed his presence, and the whole gang became aware of Arthur. Oris. The leader realized Arthur was a mage and said to himself that this wasn't an easy confrontation, but he didn't want to kill him because if he sold him on the black market, he would earn even more than for the girl. So he began to prepare magic in his arm and attacked Arthur, who tried to counter with a second attack, but the leader dodged it. Arthur threw a dagger at him to distract him, but the leader caught it and used it against him, hitting Arthur and knocking him to the ground. Then he grabbed him by the leg and lifted him, saying he wasn't strong enough for grown men. Arthur was indeed in a difficult situation. He knew the only solution was to use his magic, so he summoned a fireball into the leader's knee, who began to scream in pain. Arthur seized the moment, grabbed the dagger and hurled it into the leader's brain, ending him. The fight that remained now was for Arthur to finish off the last member of the gang who had been injured earlier, and indeed, he finished him off. Afterwards, he quickly went to check on the girl who was trapped in the carriage. This girl had been unconscious the whole time and didn't understand what was happening around her. Arthur told her that he had taken care of all the bandits and that she was safe now. This girl's name was Tethia. When Arthur reached out his hand and helped her get down from the carriage, he told her she could go home now. But as she was getting out, she noticed some blood on his hand and was very startled. She began to worry about him and ask if he was injured. Arthur immediately dismissed it, saying that children are very affected by the sight of blood. The blood decided that he wouldn't let her see the stories of the gang members thrown on the ground. He asked her to wait for him a little, and he went to cover the bodies with a cover so she wouldn't be confronted with the scene. Then she asked him, "Well, what happened to the people who kidnapped me?" Arthur didn't want to tell her the truth, so he answered her that a minor accident had happened, and they wouldn't bother her again. She fell silent and didn't say anything else, so he brought her bag from the cart and bid her farewell to continue his way home. But Tessa held his hand with all her strength and begged him not to leave her alone. She was very scared and said that ghosts might attack her if she was left alone here. Arthur knew the directions but didn't know the exact distance. Arthur didn't want to get involved in a long journey, but at the same time, he knew she would never return alone, so he agreed to take her. He looked at the wolves that the gang had raised and thought for a moment about using them for transportation, but he had no idea how to control them. He decided to leave them, but Tessa said they should at least remove the magical collars on them so they could return to the forest freely. Arthur told her they might attack later, but she was confident they wouldn't because she hadn't harmed them. And besides, it was her forest, and she was responsible for protecting them. Indeed, she removed the collars and the wolves walked away calmly and returned to the forest. The next morning, Arthur and Tessa began their journey towards the elf village. After walking for a while, they decided to take a break and eat. Arthur cooked some simple soup and said she had to eat because she needed energy to continue the long journey. Tessa smelled the food and said it was a bit strange, which was natural since Arthur wasn't a brilliant cook, and the soup was made of dried meat and salt only, so its taste wasn't that great, but it was something to sustain them. After a while, Tessa asked him, "Why did you even come to the elf forest? It's not normal for a human to come here, especially alone." Arthur told her that he had been separated from his family by mistake. He also asked about her life, and Tessa was very happy while talking. She said her parents were always busy, so she spent most of her time with her servants and her grandfather, who loved her very much. The journey continued, but since Tessa didn't know how far the village was, they couldn't determine how long it would take them. Worse than that, the wolves they had set free began to follow them from a distance, and Arthur started to regret not letting them die first. At night, Arthur decided to stay awake outside the tent and guard Tessa, but after a while, she came out and asked him to come in and sleep inside. He told her he was awake and didn't want to sleep, but in truth, she was too scared. She couldn't bear to be alone, and Arthur finally agreed. Arthur decided to monitor the situation from inside the tent to reassure her. Tessa was trying to appear unafraid, but it was clear she was terrified, and she told him he had to stay next to her. Without much talk, she turned on her side and fell asleep. The night passed without the wolves attacking them. In the morning, Arthur and Tessa continued their journey. Tessa really began to get used to Arthur and became happier and more comfortable, especially after she forgot a little of what had happened to her with the slave traders, but unfortunately, her survival skills were below zero. She didn't even know how to cross a small pond of water by herself, so Arthur had to carry her to get across. Suddenly, he felt a strange pain and a violent pulse in his chest. He didn't understand what was wrong with him. As soon as Tessa saw his condition, she ran to look for medicinal herbs that might help him, but Arthur felt that this was no ordinary illness at all. As he was sitting leaning against a tree, suddenly the wolf they had seen before appeared again. Arthur began to tense up because he couldn't stand, and if the wolf decided to attack him, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. But after a while, Tessa returned with the herbs, and Arthur warned her to stay away because the wolf might be dangerous. What happened next was a surprise. The wolf simply left a dead wild boar in front of them, then turned and walked away. Arthur didn't understand, but Tessa said maybe the wolf was thanking him for what he had done before. That night, they sat by the fire and had a small barbecue party where they ate meat, and Tessa was very happy. She said it was better than the soup he made. After they finished, Arthur was very tired and about to fall asleep, but Tessa was still talking. She told him that her grandfather used to read her stories about human kingdoms and giants, and that she had always dreamed of visiting these places, but could never go because the elves didn't mix with other races. In the end, she noticed that Arthur wasn't paying attention to her at all, but when she saw him asleep, she covered him with a blanket and said goodnight to him. The next morning, they continued their journey, but the pain in Arthur's chest became much worse. Tessa told him she was sorry she couldn't do anything, but he told her it wasn't her fault. They joked around a bit, and Arthur began to think that Tessa was the first person who could call him a friend. Even in his old life, people were afraid of him and didn't like to get close to him, but now for the first time, he felt he wasn't alone. Suddenly, Tessa saw something in front of her and gasped in surprise when she found herself standing in front of a huge tree with a magical gate in its middle. Tessa looked at him, held his hand, and said, "This is the entrance gate to the elf village. Come on with me." Unfortunately, the elves still hated humans very much. As soon as Arthur entered the elf village, they grabbed him immediately and pointed their swords at him. At that moment, He looked at Tessa, hoping she would defend him and explain to them, but he was surprised to find her standing there, looking at him coldly and not saying a word. At that moment, Arthur thought Tessa had betrayed him and had planned with her family to kill him. He couldn't believe he had been so naive and thought he could actually have a friend. He had been betrayed a lot in his past life, so the situation was tragic for him. The soldiers were about to slit his throat, and Tessa was still silent until she heard the guards saying they were going to kill him. Only then did Tessa scream and tell them to stop. One of the guards tried to warn her, telling her that this boy was a dangerous human, but she insisted, saying he wasn't dangerous at all. On the contrary, he was the only reason she had returned safely to her homeland. Tessa's words should have made the guard think twice before carrying out the sentence, but no. He remained convinced that Arthur had surely controlled her mind and made her think he was a good person, and he still intended to kill him. But before he could do anything, an old man suddenly appeared and asked them to let the boy go. This man's name was Farian, and he was Tessa's grandfather and also the former king of the elf tribe. He was more rational than them. He believed Tessa when she said Arthur had saved her, and he also apologized to Arthur for what had happened to him. But he also admitted that the presence of the lost princess with a strange human boy would make anyone suspicious. Arthur felt relieved when he knew he wouldn't be killed, but he was shocked to learn that Tessa was a princess, even though they had been together for days and traveled together, and she had never thought to say anything. After that, Tessa's parents came immediately after they learned their daughter had returned. Tessa ran to them and threw herself into their arms. At that moment, we learned that they were the king and queen of the elves, but they weren't like Farian. As soon as her father saw Arthur, he got angry and said in a loud voice, "What is this filthy human doing in my kingdom?" and ordered the soldiers to arrest him and bring him forward immediately. But no one moved. Even though he was the current king, Farian's words were clear, and he told them to leave Arthur alone, and they were all terrified of him. Farian explained to them that Arthur had saved Tessa, and at that moment he shouldn't be treated like a criminal. Even Tessa asked Arthur to enter the palace as a guest, but her father was hesitant because the presence of a human inside the elf kingdom was forbidden in the first place, but in the end, he reluctantly agreed so as not to upset Tessa. After everything was clarified, everyone began to prepare to move towards the palace. Before they left, Farian told Arthur that he wanted to talk to him later. Arthur was a little worried about him because he felt he was a very powerful man, but he didn't think much about it because Tessa pulled him by the hand and began to show him around. This was the first time Arthur had seen the elf kingdom, and he was amazed at how different it looked from the human kingdoms. But unfortunately, racism was still present because all the elves stopped what they were doing and stared at them as they walked together. No one said anything to hurt him because he was officially a royal guest, and Tessa was the only one treating him kindly. Despite that, he couldn't understand why Tessa had remained silent when they were about to kill him. So the pain in his chest returned, and this pain was increasing day by day, and he still didn't know its cause. As soon as they reached the palace, the servants greeted them. Tessa ordered them to treat Arthur with respect even if he was a human. After finishing the guest arrangements, she looked at him and said with a smile, "Come on, let's play together." But before they played, Arthur told Tessa that he needed to go talk to her parents first because they surely wanted to know what had happened to her and how they had returned. They all went to the meeting room, and Tessa went with them because she didn't like to be left out. Since they were going to talk for a while, they went to get some snacks, and the matter almost turned into a tea party, but there was still an important matter that needed to be discussed. At that time, Tessa's father decided to formally introduce himself. His name is Aldo, and as Arthur had learned before, he is the king of the elf kingdom. His wife's name is Moriel, and his father is Farian. Arthur introduced himself very humbly as a simple boy from the kingdom of Sabin, and that he knew well that a human like him shouldn't be inside the elf kingdom or even sit with the royal family, so he thanked them for their generosity and hospitality. They were surprised that a young boy like Arthur knew how to talk like adults, but more importantly, he wanted to know exactly what had happened to Tessa and how she had disappeared. Arthur told them everything that had happened, from the moment he was separated from his family after the bandit attack until he entered the elf forest, but he left out a part of the story and didn't say that he had met Sylvia in the cave. When he reached the part where he met Tessa, he explained that he found her kidnapped by slave traders. Her father was furious and said, "This is madness," and asked how humans dared to try to sell Tessa. Farian asked Arthur how he managed to save Tessa from the slave traders, and Arthur simply said that he killed them all. One of the guards didn't believe it and started to yell, saying it was impossible for a child to kill a group of slave traders alone. But Farian silenced him and said if he didn't like it, he could leave his job immediately, and it was clear that Arthur wasn't lying. Her father believed him. After they understood the whole story, Arthur made a small request. As he had said before, he was lost in the kingdom after the bandit attack, so he asked them to help him return to his country. Her father got angry again and said, "How can a human ask for help from the royal family?" But the truth was, Arthur had risked his life and brought Tessa back herself, so consequently, he had the right to ask for a favor. Moreover, if he refused, he would find himself facing Tessa's anger and yelling, and he didn't want to bother himself, so he agreed and said he would help Arthur return to Sabin. But there was a problem. The portal that leads to Sabin is closed and only opens once every 7 years during the meeting of the leaders of the 3 tribes, and the last meeting was 2 years ago, meaning there are still 5 years to go. Arthur couldn't wait all that time and told him he also didn't like the idea of a human staying in his kingdom for that long, so he decided to send a group of soldiers with him to return him to Sabin and told him to get ready because they would leave in the morning. But the time was already late, so he allowed him to sleep in the palace tonight. Arthur thanked him, but he began to feel that the pain in his chest was increasing severely, and Farian noticed that he was tired. After a while, they prepared a room for him in the palace and even a bath, but the pain increased in a difficult way to the point where he began to think he might die. He went out to the balcony to get some air, hoping it would help him calm down a bit. He felt a bit comfortable, but he knew he had to discover the reason quickly before the matter got worse. Suddenly, while he was standing, he looked up and saw Tessa and her family on the balcony above him. This sight made his heart ache more because he remembered his own family. He still didn't know if Reynold and the others had survived the attack or not, but he knew they were strong and surely managed to escape, and yet he wished he could hear their voices now. At that moment, Tessa caught sight of him and saw the signs of sadness on his face. After she finished talking with her parents, she went to him immediately. When she arrived, she apologized for the way her father had treated him, but Arthur very calmly told her that he wasn't angry. Arthur was smiling at Tessa and telling her that he understood very well why her father was dealing with him that way. After all, there was a long history of wars and enmity between humans and elves, so it was natural for the man to worry, especially when it concerned his only daughter. The talk about family suddenly made Arthur's mind wander, and he remembered that he was still far from his mother and father, and he didn't know if they were alive or dead after the gang attack. But Tessa didn't stay silent. She held his face with her hand and began to shake his head as if trying to get the bad thoughts out of his mind. She told him she was sure his parents would be very happy to see him, even if she didn't know anything about them. But if they were like her parents, they would surely love him no matter what. Suddenly, the corridor was filled with glowing butterflies, illuminating the place around Arthur and Tessa. It was a magical moment that made Arthur remember the faces of his family, and them laughing from the moment he was born into this world. But his family never made him feel that they didn't love him, so he began to ask himself why he was even doubting that. The truth was that he was letting an old misconception control his thinking, making him doubt everything, even Tessa. But as he looked into her eyes now, he saw the innocence of a young girl who couldn't possibly hurt him. But before that moment could be completed, he felt something strange, something flying coming towards Tessa. Quickly, Arthur extended his hand and blocked the attack, readying himself to attack whoever had struck her. But the surprise was that the one who had done it was Farian himself. Arthur was shocked. How could this man try to kill his granddaughter? No. But Farian reassured him and said that those glowing things were just illuminated lanterns that wouldn't have caused any harm. He was just testing Arthur's reaction speed to make sure he was really as strong as he said and that he had managed to kill the slave traders by himself. And indeed, he managed to prove it. Tessa got annoyed and ran to her grandfather and told him to stop playing. But Farian had a bigger goal. He told Arthur that he wanted to duel with him to measure his true strength, and indeed, he made a sword for him using magic and told Tessa to move away so she wouldn't get hurt. Arthur agreed and rushed to attack Farian, but the man was very fast. Even when Arthur used a barrier to increase his speed, he still couldn't touch him. When in a moment, he had a chance to strike Farian and break his sword. A piece of the sword flew towards Tessa, so Arthur used the remaining sand from the sword on it to protect her, and then he attacked using the barrier, but he didn't have any chance against him. Despite that, Arthur didn't give up. He quickly returned and managed to surprise him with a light blow to his head. It didn't cause much damage, but Farian was impressed that he managed to breach his defenses. When he went to continue, Tessa stopped him and told him to stop torturing the boy. Arthur laughed and said he felt honored that Farian wanted to duel with him. The surprise was that Farian said something unexpected. "I want to take you as my apprentice." Arthur was surprised and asked him, "Are you serious?" Farian replied with all seriousness, "I never joke about these things. Are you agreeing?" Arthur hesitated for a moment because he still wasn't sure if his family was alive or not, but Farian told him he knew a way he could talk to his family right now, immediately, and that was something Arthur couldn't ignore. But before he could respond, the pain in his chest returned, and with force. Farian noticed and told him the shocking truth. "You are cursed with an evil will, and if you don't agree to become my apprentice, this will kill you." After Arthur heard this bad news, he tried to sleep but couldn't close his eyes. The thought that he was far from his family, and also the thought that he might die soon, made him have a terrifying nightmare where there was a strange creature. Suddenly, he heard someone calling his his name. He opened his eyes quickly. Tessa was sitting above him trying to wake him up. He had been mumbling some incomprehensible words about a monster or a scary creature, so she started to get annoyed. She told him to get a grip, wake up, and get dressed quickly because someone was waiting for him outside. Arthur got out of bed and started changing his clothes. As he was getting dressed, Tessa asked him if he really intended to stay here, and a student remains with her grandfather. But Arthur hasn't made the decision yet. He is waiting to see if Farion will really allow him to communicate with his family, because if he could reassure them that he is okay, then he would be at ease. After he finished getting dressed, he and Tathia went downstairs together. The moment they opened the door, they heard Dwen arguing with Farion. Dwen couldn't stand the idea of Arthur living in the Millennium Kingdom because it violates the traditions the crown has upheld. But Farion didn't care. He loves Arthur and decided to teach him, and no one can change his mind. Tathia tried to defend Arthur, but Dwen didn't want to listen to her because he saw her taking the side of the stranger, Arthur. Strangely, Farion also didn't want to hear Dwen's opinion, so he asked Arthur and Tathia to ride in the carriage with him because they had an errand to run. While they were riding in the carriage to go meet Farion's friend, the road was so long that Tathia fell asleep. Arthur asked Farion if there was still a long way to go, and he said no. He told him that if things went well and he became his student, he would be like a member of the family. Farion wasn't annoyed by Arthur's presence with them. On the contrary, he was happy that Tathia had finally found a friend to play with because she is an only child and the heiress to the throne, which is why most kids avoid her. Those who got close to her betrayed her, so she became hesitant to open her heart to anyone. But with Arthur, she laughs and enjoys herself from the heart, which made Farion grateful for his presence. Arthur also has trust issues, but as he looks at Farion, he feels he is a kind and sincere man, so he feels reassured by him. Finally, they arrived at the place they were going to. Arthur woke Tathia up and they got out of the carriage. Arthur was excited to find out who the mysterious person was that Farion had come to see specifically. Suddenly, Farion knocked on the door. He kept bothering Rinia to come out. When he put his ear close to the door to listen, the door hit him in the face. After he regained his balance, he introduced them to Rinia and said she is a special witch and that she might help Arthur communicate with his family. Rinia let them into the house to get started, but the moment Arthur entered, he found the place completely ordinary, with a bucket of water on the table, so he wondered how she could help him like this. Rinia explained to him that she is from a rare desert tribe, those who can see the past and the future. Then Rinia brought the bucket close to him and asked him to focus and imagine his family in detail for the magic to work. Indeed, she began to use her power, and suddenly Arthur saw a vision of his family. His mother, Alice, had just finished cooking the food they love, and Reynold loves this food very much, but without Arthur, the food has no taste. Suddenly, while they were sitting at home, they heard Arthur's voice but couldn't see him, so they were very scared, thinking they were imagining a ghost. But Arthur reassured them, told them he is still alive and living now in the Millennium Kingdom. He didn't understand well how this happened, but thanks to a friend of his, he is now using a kind of spell to be able to talk to them. He told them he wished he could return home, but his body is very tired, and if he returns now, he will die. So he needs time to heal himself first. He promised them he would return, even if he doesn't know exactly when, and asked them not to blame themselves because he is the one who decided to do this, and if time went back, he would make the same decision again to protect them. At that time, Reynold and Alice couldn't believe their ears. They were so happy to know that Arthur was still alive. But unfortunately, saying goodbye again was difficult for everyone, especially Arthur. Tears fell as he bid them farewell. After this call, he decided he would not let them wait for him again, and to be able to do that, he must become stronger. So he asked Farion to be his teacher and learn from him. But there was a problem. Dwen, the ruler of the Jinn Kingdom, who rejects the presence of a human in the kingdom. But Tathia's idea was that Arthur saved her, and expelling him would make him appear ungrateful in front of people. Dwen tried to justify his refusal, saying Arthur's presence could cause political problems, but Farion told him that he had indeed decided to officially announce him as his student, and with Farion's power, no one would be able to object to Arthur's presence in the palace. And so, Arthur obtained an official permit to live in the royal palace. After the meeting ended, Dwen came himself to apologize to him. He told him that he generally doesn't like humans, but Arthur seems like a respectable boy, and since he saved his daughter, he must repay the favor. Indeed, he told him he could consider himself part of the family. Arthur was surprised. Why did they change so suddenly? But he remembered that Tathia and Farion had been defending him the whole time, so it became logical. He thanked them and told them he was proud to become part of the kingdom. But Tathia didn't stay quiet. She said welcoming him wasn't enough and they must also allow Arthur to go out and play with her. Dwen agreed, since he now considered Arthur a member of the family. As soon as that happened, Tathia took him by the hand and went out with him for a walk in the city, amazing him with all the beauty of their kingdom around them. She said there is a shop that sells sweets nearby, but they must come quickly to buy before it runs out. While they were running, Arthur bumped into a boy by accident. The boy got angry and started cursing Arthur, saying, "How dare a despicable human like you bump into me and touch me?" Arthur was going to walk away and drop the matter, but the boy started bothering Tathia, telling her she shouldn't hang out with with someone like him, and that she should spend time with him instead. The boy's name is Ferris, one of the noble elves, and very arrogant. Arthur annoyed him, so he pretended to be happy with his nobility but mispronounced his name. Ferris went crazy, and Arthur apologized as if it was a real mistake and told him he would treat him with respect next time. He turned his face and continued his way with Tatia, laughing and making fun of him. But Ferris stopped Arthur as he was walking. Despite his arrogant and conceited appearance, he is not stupid. He understood Arthur's look that he was making fun of him on purpose and didn't intend to let the matter slide easily. At that point, he challenged him to a duel, and for him, this was a big deal that couldn't be ignored. But before the matter escalated, Tatia intervened and stood in front of Ferris, telling him that what he was doing had crossed the line, even if he was from the nobility. But Ferris did not intend to back down. He said it was his natural right, and anyone who insults his name deserves to duel with him. But Tatia didn't stay quiet. She reminded him that Arthur is not an ordinary person now. He is Farian's student himself, the strongest man in the kingdom, and whoever challenges Farian's student is as if challenging Farian himself, which is a very stupid thing. Despite the warning, Ferris was overconfident and said it was impossible for him to lose to a human. He continued his challenge and told Arthur that if he refused, it would tarnish the name of Farian, who had adopted him as a student. Arthur was confused, not understanding how a small child was dealing with the matter so calmly, because in ancient times, duels were to the death, not a children's game. But when he looked around, even the adults were watching with some amusement on their faces. He understood that in this world, duels weren't for killing, and that it was just a normal fight. So he decided there was no harm in participating, especially since he doesn't run away from challenges. Tatia asked him if he was sure he wanted to do this, and he very calmly said, "Okay, agreed." Ferris entered, holding his staff in his hand, entering with full confidence, sure that he would win in one hit. But that one hit brought his end. Ferris fell. At that moment, his friends ran to him, trying to wake him up. Tatia wasn't surprised. She was sure of the outcome from the beginning. After they made sure it was over, she took Arthur's hand and pulled him away. There were still many things she wanted to play with him. They spent the whole day together, going around to many shops and strolling through the city until they decided to take a break on a quiet balcony. Tatia looked at him and asked when he would start his training with Farian. Arthur replied, "Tomorrow morning," but he looked distracted. The truth is, his mind was still preoccupied with what Farian had told him very frankly, that this training would be very difficult, and all this without support from his family. And Farian asked him, "Are you really ready for all this?" And Arthur said, "Yes, I am ready." He knows he is about to enter into great hardship and effort, but he decided to reach his goal no matter what. He wants to become strong enough to build the future he dreams of and protect the people he loves. Tatia then smiled and said that she would also work on herself and not let him surpass her. Then, a few years later, Tatia and Arthur grew up together, and the competition between them increased every day. They went outside the palace and noticed Farian walking to attend an important meeting. Arthur was wondering what this meeting was about, but Tatia decided to change the subject. She told him she had made a special burger for him, and before he could even respond, she said he must thank her well for the effort she made for him. Arthur took a bite of the burger, and instead of praising her, he told her sarcastically that it was just normal, and he really meant to provoke her. And he succeeded, and made her get provoked. Anyway, after breakfast, they went to the training arena and started wrestling with their hands, without weapons, under Farian's supervision. After a while, Farian gave each of them a wooden sword to increase the intensity of the training. Arthur got used to it, and loved to provoke Tatia again. But Tatia didn't take it to heart and said that every challenge was that she would hit him a blow that would teach him manners. Over time, the two began to get more accustomed to the swords, and Farian decided to take the training to a higher level. After they finished fighting, he gathered them and began to explain to them about magic. He said that the first time a person opens the mana inside them, they have the ability to control one of the 4 basic elements: fire, water, air, and earth. The element that aligns with them depends partly on the person's race. For example, most elves have an affinity with the element of air, and the other races are stronger in controlling water and earth. Dwarves, especially, are skilled in magic related to earth and fire. As for humans, without prolonging it, they have the ability to deal with all 4 elements, but that doesn't mean anyone can control them all. Everyone has one element that aligns with them, and the matter is completely random. Farian also mentioned the very rare cases where humans can control more than one element. Tatia asked Farian, "Then why isn't Arthur training his body using magic like I do?" Farian replied to her, saying that Arthur is still weak inside. There is something called the will of the beast that disrupts the balance between his body and magic, and that is what makes him feel pain in his heart every now and then. Arthur began to suspect that this will of the beast was related to Sylvia, but he couldn't rush to conclusions. Farian said that to treat this situation, they must first understand what is happening inside him. Tatia asked him in a joking way if it hurt every time she hit Arthur. He admitted that she does hit hard. After After that, Arthur explained to her why Tathia had suddenly become strong and at least almost as strong as him. It turned out that elves awaken their mana at the age of 10, and Tathia, who is 9 years old, hasn't activated her mana yet, and that happened while she was sleeping, and she destroyed her room by mistake. This reminds us of the first time Arthur awakened his mana when he was little. At that time, he literally blew up his entire family's house, if you remember. From that time, Tathia decided to train with him to develop herself more. And on one of the training days, Farian decided that the time had come for him to control the will of the beast. He told him that if the ritual succeeded, he wouldn't feel pain anymore and would become a true beast tamer. Arthur got excited and sat down for Farian to begin the rituals. Farian explained that he would ignite a flame inside the core of his mana, and that what he would feel is just a slight heat. The moment Farian tapped something inside him, it activated. Arthur began to scream from the intensity of the pain. A tremendous energy came out of him, throwing Farian and Tathia far away. After the ritual ended, Arthur fell to the ground unconscious. Farian quickly understood what had happened and took him to the palace, staying sitting by his side until he woke up. The moment he made sure he was okay, he asked him about the will of the beast inside him and asked if he knew it. Arthur replied and said that what is inside him is the Earth Dragon. Farian had been suspicious of this from the beginning, and since dragons are mythical, dangerous creatures, he asked Arthur to promise him not to tell anyone about what is inside him, because evil people might covet it and cause him problems he is better off without. After Arthur managed to awaken the power of the beast inside him, and Farian told him that he could return to his family after 4 months, which shocked Arthur because he thought he would stay in this palace for 2 more years at least. At that time, Farian clarified to him that a major cultural exchange event between the 3 kingdoms would happen after 4 months, and the gate of the city where his family lives would open immediately after that event. Arthur was especially touched when he understood that Farian had left the training and gone to that meeting specifically for him. It was a moment filled with many emotions, and Arthur felt how much the people here cared for him. Farian reassured him and told him to be happy because he would see his family again. And when Arthur asked about Tathia, Farian told him that she already knew from that night. Arthur was sitting talking to his dragon egg, telling it about what would happen, and suddenly the egg began to glow. Arthur became very tense, not understanding what was happening, but suddenly the egg opened, and a small dragon came out. Arthur fell in love with it at first sight, but the moment it bit him, he understood that it wasn't as kind as its appearance suggested, and it turned out it had placed a magical seal on him. Now Arthur could hear its voice, even if it was all nonsense, but he was very happy that he could communicate with it. He named it Sylvie, after its mother, Sylvia. He kept contemplating the seal on his arm, unable to believe he had become a father at only 8 years old. In the morning, Tathia, as usual, came in to wake him up, but when she pulled the cover off of him, she saw this strange entity in front of her and screamed very loudly, to the point that Arthur woke up from his sleep startled. But the scream wasn't out of horror, it was excitement. Tathia was very happy with Sylvie. She started picking her up and pampering her as if she were a small baby. On their way to the training arena, Tathia was trying every way to make Sylvie like her, but unfortunately, the dragon didn't pay attention to anyone except Arthur. Then they reached Farian, and Arthur was worried about how people would deal with a creature like Sylvie, but Farian reassured him and said that no one would even believe it was a dragon, so they would just say it's a special mana beast, and that's it. From here, the new training began. Farian told Arthur that he now must learn to control his beast's power, and the best way to train is through physical combat. But not just any combat. Farian suddenly transformed into a terrifying beast, with a scary voice and terrifying energy. The light around his body was as if it was swallowing the place. Arthur, out of extreme fear, couldn't even see him. He was disappearing and appearing suddenly, so Arthur surrendered. When Farian returned to his normal form, he told him that this beast is called a shadow pouncer, and that it controls light and sound to the point that you can't feel it around you. Despite its power, it consumes a lot of energy from him. After that, Farian brought out the staffs and said to them, "Let's train like humans." Days passed, then weeks, and after that, months and years. Arthur developed greatly and learned to control his mana and his beast's power. He became much stronger, even to the point where he could face Farian's shadow pouncer by himself. But as the time to open the gate approached, Tathia began to feel that the separation would break her. When Arthur saw she was sad, he decided to go reconcile with her. He went to her through the window carrying a rose. The moment she saw him, she stood up. He hung the rose on her ear and asked her to go for a walk. Indeed, they went out together. They didn't even care about all the warnings against them going into that forest. They kept walking in the forest until Arthur lit a fire to warm themselves, and they sat next to it talking. Tathia began to feel sleepy, and Arthur told her to sleep, but she didn't want to leave him. They continued talking about the human world, but in the middle of the conversation, sleep overcame her, and she fell asleep feeling safe next to him. The next day, Arthur was leaving, and Farian gave him a compass, so he wouldn't get lost on the way, and told him it had a magical seal on it, and if at any time he wanted to return to them, the compass would show him the way. Arthur asked about Tathia, but he remembered she was sad and couldn't bid him farewell. He was standing in front of the gate that would open the way for him when he heard a voice calling him. Tathia was running towards him. She fell while coming, but got up and continued, hugging him and advising him to eat well and take care of himself. Arthur put his hand on her and said he would miss her. With eyes full of tears, she replied that she also wouldn't be able to do without him. The gate opened. It was a difficult and emotional farewell moment. All the emotions were visible on their faces, but each was trying to hide their tears from the other. After a long journey, Arthur finally returned to the human world. His heart was fluttering with excitement because he would see his family again. He walked to the house and quietly knocked on the door. His little sister opened the door. He looked at her and smiled. He knew she was his little sister he had left while she was still in her mother's womb. Behind her, his father and mother ran to the door calling for the daughter, Lenore, and the moment they saw him, they were shocked. They couldn't believe their eyes. Their lost son, Arthur, was standing in front of them in the flesh. They all entered the house, and immediately Alice began asking Arthur if he was okay or not. The last time he talked to them, he told them he was tired, so she was worried about him and wanted to make sure if the pain had eased or not. Arthur reassured her and told her he was fine, and there was no need to worry about him, but he had many things he wanted to tell them. Arthur began to explain to them everything that had happened to him from the moment he was separated from them, but he didn't mention his meeting with Sylvia or the matter of the will of the beast inside him. He told them he met Tathia and stayed in the Millennium Kingdom for a while to get treated. She asked him again if he was sure he was okay now, because she was carrying the worry that he might get sick again and they wouldn't be able to treat him. But Arthur reassured her and told her that wouldn't happen, of course. He couldn't tell them the truth, so he invented a reason and said that his illness was because he used mana too early, which caused an imbalance in his energy. He wasn't comfortable lying to his family, but he felt he had to hide certain things until he became strong enough and could face any danger he might encounter. Suddenly, Reynolds caught a glimpse of Sylvia and asked Arthur where he got her from. Arthur invented a story and said he found her in a cave and decided to take her with him and keep her as his pet. Lenore was very comfortable with Sylvia, which calmed the atmosphere a bit, but Reynolds still had questions. So he stood up and asked Arthur about his current energy level. Alice shouted at him and told him, "No arguments now. Arthur just returned from a long journey." But Reynolds saw no problem in knowing how far his son had reached in power, and Arthur had no objection. But before responding, he wanted to know what Reynolds worked as to be able to live in such a nice house. Reynolds said he works as a security trainer and that his current energy level is dark orange. Arthur was surprised because he knew reaching that level is very difficult. Energy grades start from black to white, and the lighter the color, the stronger the energy. Reynolds is from the type that enhances his body, so it's natural for him to train a lot. But the strange thing was that he was also working on his energy. Reynolds, proud of himself, asked Arthur about his level. Arthur told him he had reached the light red level. Reynolds was shocked and cursed, without noticing that Lenore was in the room, and she started repeating the curse word. He was stunned that Arthur was one step away from surpassing him in power. He asked Arthur to go down to the backyard with him to test himself. Arthur agreed, but before they moved, the room door opened and Vincent entered asking if Reynolds' son had really returned. Reynolds introduced Arthur to Vincent and told him he is the owner of the auction house where he works, meaning he is basically his boss. Vincent and his wife, Thabessa, were happy to finally meet Arthur. They had heard a lot about him. Arthur told them he was honored to meet them. After that, Vincent and Thabessa introduced their daughter, Lilia, to Arthur. She was shy at first, but the moment she saw Sylvia on Arthur's shoulder, she fell in love with her. She asked Arthur if she could touch her, and the moment she agreed, she started pampering her. Reynolds told Arthur that Vincent is the living owner of the house, so it's better to get his permission before they break anything. Vincent, the moment he heard the word break, got tense, and his fears were confirmed when he found out that Reynolds and Arthur intended to fight in the backyard. All the people went out to watch the match. Vincent asked if it was really true that Arthur would fight his father. He couldn't believe that a small boy like Arthur had reached this stage of power, but Alice said that her son always learned quickly, and there was no reason for him to lie. Thabessa looked at Vincent with a calm smile and told him, "Just sit and watch. This show will please you." The truth is, Arthur had reached the orange stage a long time ago, but while he was training on his will of the beast, he wasn't allowed to work on his normal mana at all. But that doesn't mean he wasn't preparing some surprises and was waiting for the right moment to show them what he could do. And the moment the match between him and Reynolds began, they started exchanging blows, each trying to test the other's strength. Reynolds was impressed by Arthur's strength and told him he was extremely strong, but despite that, he was still able to overcome him in terms of physical strength and hit him. With the second hit, he was able to make him retreat a bit, and after a little while, there was some distance between the two. At that time, Reynolds decided to take things to a completely different level. He lit his hand on fire and said to Arthur, "If you feel like you can't handle it, you can withdraw now." In this world, every mage has a specific type of mana they are most compatible with, like your fingerprint. Those who summon creatures and elements from the desert are very skilled at manipulating them, but for those who rely on strengthening their bodies like Reynolds, it's a bit harder. However, there is a small exception. If their power reaches a certain level, they can determine the type of element that suits them and start using it to enhance their attacks. Reynolds used this feature, and indeed, when he infused his body with fire magic, he became a heavyweight opponent and not easy to defeat. Arthur decided he would give it his all too, and began pumping mana into his arms. The two collided again, and this time the force was more balanced, and Arthur began to block the blows skillfully. But still, Reynolds' strength was enough to throw him back each time, which was discouraging him a bit. But he didn't give up because he knew he still had other things hidden. The information he had retained from his previous life made his training with mana very effective. He was able to master fire magic at an incredible speed, and because of that, Frian suggested he start training with a higher level of fire. And indeed, Arthur began to gather his mana again, but this time something different happened. Electric sparks began to appear around him. Yes, the boy began to use lightning, and this was the first appearance of his new ability. Reynolds couldn't believe it and thought Arthur was controlling a stronger version of fire, but the truth was, it was real lightning. But Arthur wasn't finished yet. While using lightning, he suddenly began to control the water in the fountain next to them and launched a water attack from behind Reynolds. Reynolds managed to block the attack, but his mind was trying to comprehend what was happening. Arthur was now controlling two elements, fire and water, and he didn't even know about the lightning yet. He was very proud of him and went and hugged him, asking, "Where did you learn these things? And what else do you have hidden?" Arthur told him very modestly that he had only recently learned lightning magic and still couldn't control it well, but was improving one thing at a time. Then, Nuar ran onto the training ground to check on them, and her astonishment was evident. Vincent and Tabs were smiling. They were standing watching, both of them utterly amazed because what Arthur had done was not something a normal child or anyone in general could do. After the training, everyone went back inside the house to have dinner together. Vincent wasn't quiet at all. He sat praising Arthur. He said proudly that he had known for a long time that Arthur was no ordinary child, especially since he awakened his mana at 3 years old. Vincent said to him, "3 years old? Are you joking? The prodigies themselves awaken their mana at 8 years old." Reynolds laughed and said, "Yeah, and don't forget he blew up the house back then." He was laughing so hard he fell off his chair. At that time, Vincent stood up and said to Arthur that he must enter the Cyrus Academy, that this boy deserved the best education possible. Reynolds hadn't thought about it before, because that academy is known to be for the elite, the rich, and the very distinguished. Tabs agreed with Vincent and said they might even cover the tuition fees because someone like Arthur would surely achieve great things. Alice was a bit hesitant and said they had helped enough already, and now they also wanted to pay for Arthur's education. Besides, Arthur is only 8 years old and school starts at age 10. Vincent reassured her, saying that because of his work, he would know the academy's director personally and might convince her to make an exception for Arthur. But before he could finish his speech, Arthur intervened and said, "Can you take my opinion? I just returned to my family today and want to spend some time with them before you decide to send me away." His mother was at the dinner table and started walking down the halls, but it was clear he still wasn't used to this big house. Suddenly, Lilia called out to Arthur and warned him that if he kept walking that way, he might get lost, and told him to follow her. Arthur, frankly, had nothing else to do, so he said, "All right, let's go." She walked with him alone from the servants' lounge where the servants stay, and there they all welcomed Lilia because she always comes to sit with them whenever she has free time. And even though Arthur had just arrived today, everyone knew him well. Wasn't he the one who set the whole garden on fire in his confrontation with Reynolds a little while ago? Arthur apologized to them for what happened, but they took it as a joke and weren't upset. Lilia asked Maria if there was any pie left, and indeed there was, but Maria warned her to be a bit careful as her weight had increased lately. One of the maids told Arthur that Lilia likes to come to this room when she's stressed because her parents pressure her all the time to awaken the magic inside her and become a mage. She herself also wants to become a mage, but the pressure on her makes her tired, so she needs to escape a bit and disconnect. And that same night, Arthur was sitting with his parents, and they still couldn't believe their son had returned. His appearance had changed a lot since the last time they saw him, but he was still the same person to his parents. The talent Arthur has is something great, and they are confident that he will become a very powerful mage one day. But even if it doesn't happen, they still love him just the way he is. And of course, knowing that the day had been long for him and he needed rest, his mother got up to let him rest. But before they left, Reynolds stopped and said he wanted to talk to him about what Vincent had said earlier. He told him he wasn't pressuring him or anything, and that all he said was for his benefit only, and no one expected him to go to the academy if he didn't want to. The next morning, Arthur woke up and went downstairs because he had guests coming to visit him. Members of his father's team heard he had returned, so they decided to come check on him. Arthur was very happy to see them, but Angel was the happiest. She ran to him and gave him a heartfelt hug. After a while, everyone sat down and started telling each other what had happened. Arthur was surprised to learn that the team was in another city called Staten and were there on a big mission, but had returned to the capital for other work. At that time, Arthur thought to himself that he really didn't know anything about the kingdom of Sabine or even the continent itself, so he began to feel that an adventure like this could teach him a lot about the world. But at the same time, that meant he would be away from his family again, and that wasn't an easy decision for him. The next morning, we see Arthur in his room, sitting contemplatively. Time literally stopped. Perhaps he was trying out a new miraculous technique, but it was clear his body couldn't handle it because after just a few seconds, he was very tired. At that time, Arthur remembered that one of the maids was saying that Vincent and Tabs were nervous because of their daughter Lilia, who still hadn't manifested her mana energy. At that time, Alice came in with everyone and announced that it was time for Arthur to clean up. They took him to get a haircut, and after a lot of work, Arthur came out looking amazing. All the girls were mesmerized by him. Tabs thanked him and said he finally looked worthy of their big auction. Alice explained that this auction is attended by kings and princes, which is why they had to prepare Arthur appearance-wise before taking him there. After that, Tabs decided to show him the city, and Eleanor asked him to accompany her on this tour. But Lilia changed her mind and said that Eleanor always used to go out with her, but ever since Arthur arrived, she'd been stuck to him, and then she walked away. Arthur went with everyone to the market, and there Alice bought him new clothes. After finishing that, they went to play a bit in the city square next to the king's statue. Unfortunately, a group of students from the Magic Academy appeared and started bullying Arthur, throwing things at him. But Arthur ignored them and didn't respond, walking away to avoid causing trouble. Lilia told him that those students act like they're kings because they are magic users. Arthur frankly didn't care, and as he was walking with the group, he felt a strange energy coming from a nearby shop. He went in to see what it was about and discovered a shop selling monster cores, which are magic cores taken from magic beasts that increase the power of the user. Arthur knew about these cores, especially since Sylvia herself came from one of them, but he didn't know people sold and bought them so normally because it wasn't common in the Kingdom of Elves. Tabs began to explain to him and told him that there are very rare cores that contain the will of the beast inside them, and that makes their price very high. The cheapest one could start from 100 gold coins, and its price is enough for an entire family to live for hundreds of years. Tabs told him that she and her husband were planning to auction some cores at the next auction, and when she saw Arthur's interest, she promised to let him touch one of them, which was a great honor for them. Arthur pretended to be happy, but he was already satisfied with the will of the beast he had. At that time, Lilia suddenly became sad, and her mother immediately understood that the girl wanted to have a core herself so she could unlock her energy. But Tabs told her that method wouldn't work. Lilia tried to understand, but Tabs cut the conversation short and told her not to bring up the topic again. After that, everyone went to a restaurant to have lunch, but Arthur didn't enjoy the food at all. Arthur looked at Lilia, feeling how sad and frustrated she was. He managed to understand the situation she was in, especially since her father, Vincent, had placed all his hopes on her, which made her rush to awaken her mana by any means. Arthur wanted to help her, especially since her family had stood by his family before, but before he could talk to her, he noticed she had disappeared. He started looking for her and finally found her inside a weapon shop. She had gone to buy a cheap monster core with all the money she had. Arthur stopped her and said, "Even if you buy this core, it doesn't mean your mana will activate. Things don't work that way, miss." But Lilia was determined to try. She said to him, "It's unfair. An ordinary girl like me has no talent, unlike you who is amazingly special." The argument began to heat up between them until Lilia accidentally bumped into one of the academy students. The surprise was that he wasn't alone. He had two of his friends with him, and they all decided to punish her. Even the shop owner didn't have the courage to stop them. At that time, Arthur decided to intervene and activated his magic. But suddenly, Tabs entered the place and ended everything with one word when she revealed that she was the head of the Helia family. The students, as soon as they recognized her, changed their attitude, especially since the Helia family is one of the biggest supporters of the academy, and they didn't want to lose their support. The situation ended, and the group returned home. As soon as Vincent found out what happened, he thanked Arthur for not getting into a fight that could have caused a problem with the academy, but he asked Arthur and Lilia to be more careful with their actions next time, especially since Arthur would be entering the academy soon. The surprise came when Lilia discovered that her father was the one who would pay for Arthur's tuition at the academy. At that moment, her mind exploded. She thought her father saw Arthur as better than her, and that instead of betting on her, he had bet on Arthur. She exploded, saying she hated both of them. Arthur, despite this situation, wasn't affected because he understood she didn't mean it. He went later and knocked on her door to call her for dinner, but she didn't open. At that time, Sylvia alerted him to a servant standing behind them. The man told him that Lilia wasn't in her room and took him to where she was. She was sitting alone, thinking about everything that had happened in her life and how disappointed her parents must be with her. She remembered when she was little, and her father always said he wished to see her as a mage and was always encouraging her, even though she didn't develop quickly. She also remembered her mother telling her not to rush, and that her father had donated large sums to secure a place for her at the academy when her ability appeared. But when she heard her father saying the same things to Arthur, who had just entered their lives a few days ago, she felt her heart break and felt worthless. It made things worse when the students said that even if she bought a manicure, she wouldn't benefit from it because she had no talent anyway. So she felt like the girl who has everything but can't take advantage of any of it. At that time, Arthur interrupted her thoughts and told her that her parents were worried about her and that they truly loved her. He felt he was the cause of what she was going through and thought about apologizing to her, but he took it back because he felt that even if he apologized, the problem wouldn't be solved, especially since he didn't see himself at fault. But the surprise was that Lilia was the one who apologized. She said she was sorry for what she said and that she didn't mean to hurt him. She told him she always felt frustrated because of her delayed ability, and when she saw him, a genius and a mage from the first day, she felt she was wasting away. Her feeling increased when she found all her father's attention going to Arthur, but Arthur reassured her and told her it wasn't true and that her face lights up when he talks. Arthur was feeling strongly for Lilia and knew well what it meant to feel abandoned or unimportant, so he started telling her about the place where he learned magic and that he met a little girl who was very kind to him. He took out the rose that Cecilia had given him, and when he saw her admiration for it, he smiled and told her that her father was just a bit excited, nothing more, and that he was confident in her, which is why he was giving her this opportunity. But he knew that words wouldn't change much and that if he really wanted to help her, he had to do something real. So he asked her calmly, "Do you want to learn magic?" She replied enthusiastically, "Yes, of course." At that moment, he understood that the reason for her anger wasn't just her parents' behavior, but because she always felt they saw her as nothing more than a servant in the house and didn't see any other value in her. After that, Lilia's parents discovered she had disappeared from the house. They were very worried and went to confront Arthur to find out what happened. He told them he had sent Lilia to the place where he himself learned magic. Vincent got angry and said that even if his intentions were good, he should have come back to them first and gotten their opinion. But Arthur told them that this was her wish and that if he had told them, she might have backed down. And he gave them a reply written by Lilia herself. In it, she was apologizing and saying that she knew she was useless and that she had decided to travel to learn magic and wouldn't return until she awakened her strength. At that time, Vincent fell to his knees. Tears fell from his eyes, feeling how wrong he was. He was the one who made her believe that her peak was to become a mage and that she was nothing without magic. He said while crying, "Even if you don't awaken your power, you are our precious daughter and don't need to prove anything." Arthur called out to Sylvia and asked her if she heard something. Suddenly, she came out from behind the curtain, and it turned out the whole thing was an act. "My friend, we knew she didn't travel or anything. He was the one who arranged it all to make them see her real value." And she apologized to them, but Arthur took all the blame. He said he was the one who started this game and confirmed that he would never joke about something like Lilia's disappearance again because he knew that pain himself, since he himself had been lost before. Vincent finally understood that he had been too excited about the idea of magic and asked himself if it were that easy, then why wasn't he a mage? He apologized to Arthur and said he was wrong to try to send him to the academy when he hadn't spent enough time with his family yet. After that emotional moment, he went to his daughter and hugged her, him and Tabs. They told her, "You are our daughter, silly, whether you have magic or not, and we don't need you to go to the academy. It's over." But Lilia smiled and said she still wanted to become a mage and would go to the academy even if it took years. And from here, Arthur began to awaken her magical power. He asked her and Eleanor to sit and breathe slowly. They closed their eyes and began to take breath after breath. Indeed, Eleanor saw some stars, but they disappeared when she lost her focus. Lilia at first didn't see anything and was surprised, but Arthur came closer to them, touched their backs, and began to transfer mana to them. Suddenly, Lilia screamed with joy, "I saw the stars! They looked like the flower you showed me, Arthur!" Her parents were very happy and decided to throw a party to celebrate this achievement. In the middle of the party, Arthur told Lilia that she would need 2 years to get used to her mana, but as long as she trained properly, she would be fine. In another place, a strange man was entering the city with a large entourage. He looked like a king. He had heard about the auction in the city and came specifically to see it himself. After a while, Arthur and his family were invited to the auction. When they entered the place, they were amazed by its grandeur and luxury. Alice began to worry and feel that she wasn't suited for such grand occasions, but Tabs reassured her and told her there was no need to worry and that they should enjoy their night. That night, everyone was waiting, whether adventurers or people from the upper class, because it was a very rare opportunity to buy things collected by Vincent himself, like magic monster cores or rare and very expensive statues from distant lands. That's why security was very high, and Reynolds was in charge of all the security. When the auction started, Vincent went on stage and announced that they had distinguished guests tonight. The royal family of the Kingdom of Sabine were present: King Brian, Queen Priscilla, and the young prince and Princess Curtis and Catherine. Everyone stood up clapping and greeting the royal family. Arthur assumed they must be good since people loved them so much. With the royal family present, Reynolds and the guards were on high alert to ensure everything went smoothly inside. Inside the auction, Vincent started with the first item, a sword made by a famous blacksmith, infused with mana that made electricity course along its edge. The starting price was 50,000 gold coins, but one of the attendees immediately raised the price to 51,000, and then people kept raising the prices. Arthur began to amuse himself by estimating how much elemental magic could be added to a weapon if the weapon was suitable. At that time, Vincent presented two masks on stage, which caught his attention greatly. But suddenly, he noticed that Sylvia wasn't there and remembered she was playing with Lilia and Eleanor, but he saw them sleeping to the side, so he went to look for her. At the same time, Sylvia was walking in the corridors of the auction house, completely unaware. Suddenly, the mage who had come with the royal family stopped her. Vincent returned to the stage to present the next item and said it was a lion cub, rated A, meaning it was a rare and dangerous beast. As soon as Curtis saw it, he told his father he wanted one like it. As the auction started, one of the kings immediately offered 1,000 gold coins for it. Of course, no one would outbid a king, so the cub was sold to him immediately. The king went on stage to take it, and Vincent asked him what he intended to do with it. The king said he might tame it for himself, but since Curtis said he wanted to become a beast tamer, he would leave this cub for him. At that same moment, Arthur was still looking for Sylvia when he suddenly heard a scream coming from the end of the hallway. He ran towards the sound and found the mage standing in front of Sylvia. He immediately understood it was the mage who came with the royal family. Arthur didn't want to cause trouble, so he asked the mage very respectfully to leave Sylvia alone because she was his magical beast. The mage was a bit surprised because he thought she was one of the items up for auction. Sylvia ran to Arthur, and just as he decided to leave, the mage said he was still interested in her and wanted to take her for himself, demanding that Arthur hand her over. Arthur looked at him in disbelief and said, "How can you imagine I would do that?" But the mage was offended by Arthur's refusal and threw a fireball at him in an attempt to scare him, saying it was an order from a royal mage. But Arthur stood his ground and decided to leave, which made the mage even angrier. Here, Arthur stopped and turned to him, emitting a terrifying, deadly energy and said, "Repeat what you just said." But clearly, he had forgotten himself because his deadly energy spread throughout the entire auction, shattering all the glass in an instant. People who had mana like the king could withstand it, but those without mana, like Vincent, fell over immediately from its intensity. The king ran to check on Vincent, and the royal guards surrounded the place because they thought the source of this energy was an intruder threatening the king. The king told them to leave him alone, that he could protect himself, and ordered them to protect the other people and find the intruder. At that time, Arthur realized what he had done. After what happened, Arthur succeeded in terrifying the mage, but he knew he had just landed himself in big trouble. He decided to calm himself and withdraw the deadly aura he had emitted, but the damage was already done. The whole place was in chaos. People were terrified and didn't understand what was happening. Reynolds made a quick decision and ordered the entire hall to be evacuated until he could control the situation. After the people left, the king asked to meet with Reynolds alone. He wanted to talk to him about his failure to stop what happened in time. Reynolds apologized sincerely and said he was ready to bear any punishment the king deemed appropriate. But before the king could pass judgment, the royal mage, whose name was Sebastian, intervened and said he would prefer the king forgive Reynolds, especially since no one was harmed. But Sebastian wasn't saying this for Reynolds' sake. He said it frankly when he commented on the appearance of Arthur's mana beast and said he liked it very much. The king introduced everyone to Sebastian, saying he was one of the strongest mages working with the royal family and had saved his life more than once, which is why he respected him. He said to him, "Since Sebastian likes the boy's beast, we could make it a gift of thanks for him," meaning give him that beast. Arthur was about to object, but Tab stopped him, saying, "You can't talk like that to the king." Reynolds clearly stated that the beast was Arthur's and that no one had the right to take it from him. Even he himself didn't have the right to agree or refuse on his behalf. So the king looked at Arthur and asked him personally, "Can you give Sebastian this beast?" Arthur replied politely, "I can't. Sylvia is not something I can ever part with." The king decided to raise the offer and said, "Then take even the royal lion I just bought in exchange for Sylvia." But Arthur, very calmly, said, "I have no intention of selling or trading Sylvia for any price." The king began to lose his patience and said, "I've asked you twice, and a king shouldn't have to ask at all." But Arthur's response was shocking. He looked at the king and asked him, "Are you willing to sell your children?" The whole hall fell silent. The king was shocked and couldn't respond. Arthur continued, "I refused 3 times, and yet you still can't understand that some things are too precious to their owner and cannot be bought at any price." The guards rushed at Arthur to attack him, but he repelled them with a single blow, knocking them down in a second. Sebastian got angry and said, "Failures, can't you even kill a small child?" and threw a powerful fire spell at Arthur to burn him. But Arthur used his special ability and stopped time for everyone except Sebastian. Sebastian went crazy, not understanding what was happening, but Arthur told him, "No one here can hear you, and no one will save you from me." He started walking towards him slowly, and Sebastian tried to threaten him, saying he couldn't defeat him. But Arthur, with complete coolness, broke his legs. Sebastian started screaming and calling for help. But Arthur said, "Listen to me well. If you decide to threaten me again, you will see something worse than this. Know your place well." After a few seconds, the ability ended, and time returned to normal. Arthur collapsed to the ground from exhaustion and lost consciousness. As soon as Arthur woke up, Sylvia told him what happened after he collapsed. She said everyone was shocked when he suddenly lost consciousness, and she ran quickly to heal him. But even with healing, his body needed a long time to return to normal. When she found him awake and well, she smiled and asked him, "What do you think about going out to buy some things?" Arthur agreed because he really needed a change of scenery after all that had happened. As they were walking in the market, Arthur spotted a hairpin that looked delicate and said to himself, "It would look very nice on Eleanor." But the problem was he didn't have enough money. Sylvia noticed and bought it for her immediately, telling him to give it to Eleanor as a gift. She would be happy with it. She also offered to buy him another gift, but Arthur asked her, "Can we just buy all this normally? Could it be that Reynolds lost his job at the auction and there's no money?" She replied with complete confidence, "Don't worry, we are fine. And by the way, I have a job too, you know." He was surprised and asked, "What do you mean?" She said, "I make fancy things for the nobles and people really like them. They sell for good prices." After a while, they were returning from the market carrying many bags, each holding several things. As soon as they entered the house, they heard Reynolds' voice talking to someone in the living room, saying agitatedly, "No one will be able to silence me, especially after my son almost died." Arthur entered and asked what was wrong. As soon as Reynolds saw him, he stood up and said, relieved, "Thank God you're okay, my son." Arthur said, "There's no need to worry, I'm fine, thank God." The man who was talking with Reynolds understood immediately that this was the boy the problem happened with. So he looked at Arthur and said, "Pleased to meet you. Come sit with us. Come here, dear." It turned out this man had come on behalf of the king and brought a bag of gold as a small compensation from the king for the minor incident that occurred. Arthur tried to be polite and said, "I thank you for your trouble and for coming all the way here." But inside he was saying, "A minor incident? I was attacked by 2 knights and a royal mage." But he didn't want to cause trouble and decided to let it go. The man laughed and said, "The king is very concerned about your safety. The knights who attacked you have already been fired because the king would never allow the killing of a small child for refusing his request." Reynolds replied angrily, "Fired? That's it? They were going to kill my son." But the man said, "Don't forget that your son was also somewhat rude to the king. And despite that, the king allowed you to continue your work at the auction. Things must be balanced." Reynolds was about to object, but Arthur cut him off and said, "I was the one who was wrong to speak inappropriately, and I'm fine now, so let it go." Then he asked the man about Sebastian. The man said, "Sebastian was fired too, and now he's being treated in the hospital. He kept shouting and saying that you were the one who broke his legs, but people saw Arthur the whole time, and no one saw him do that. So the king was convinced that his own spell backfired on him and broke his legs. That's why the king is very sad and is trying to compensate him in any way." The man also advised Arthur, saying, "You are a good and talented boy, but be careful when talking to people in power. Not all of them are as kind as the king." After he finished speaking and left, Reynolds went and handed the entire bag of gold to Arthur. Arthur was surprised and said, "Are you sure you want to give me all this?" Reynolds replied, "Of course, because you were the one in danger, so this is rightfully yours." Reynolds continued and said, "Besides, you need money if you intend to do something important ahead." Arthur realized that this day had been a big lesson for him. Yes, he had been a king in his previous life, but now he was nothing more than a small child, and he needed to think about how to gain political power to be able to face what was coming. And because of that, the next day he went to meet Judith is the dean of the Magic Academy, and this dean isn't just anyone you can meet so simply. Her status is extremely high, and her words are like a sword because she is the head of the Cyrus Academy, and her authority reaches everywhere. She had heard good things about him from Vincent, but she is not the type to believe words without seeing with her own eyes. So because of that, she decided to test him and see for herself if he deserved all that talk or not. The first thing she did was try to intimidate him with her massive magical power, but Arthur remained standing normally as if nothing was happening. Even though he managed to withstand that pressure, he admitted honestly that it was truly a terrifying force, and that's natural because Judith is the strongest sorceress in the entire country. So he decided to show her his abilities to prove that Vincent wasn't exaggerating when he praised him. He started the first step by surrounding himself with wind magic, and at the same time, he used earth magic and lifted some rocks. Then, he utilized wind magic to accelerate those rocks and threw them towards her, but she deflected them with ease using just one hand. So he summoned some fiery daggers and appeared behind her. But before they could reach her, she used wind magic, and threw them away easily. He was amazed by the ease with which she handled everything he did and began to get angry, deciding to attack her with his own hand. But before he could even get close to her to hit her, Judith used a wall of wind and blew him away. He fell to the ground, and at that moment, he was sure he had no chance against her in this condition. But even though he lost, she wasn't upset. On the contrary, she told him he was very talented, but his problem was that he overestimated himself, and that's what made her think he could easily defeat her. Then, she wanted to show him her real power, and told him that his final test was to see if he could remain standing after her next blow. She raised both hands and sent a wave of sound magic towards him. The wave was so strong that it broke the rocks around him and was about to burst his eardrums. But he endured and remained standing until the magic ended. Judith was amazed by his endurance, which made her think about taking him as her student. But Arthur had conditions. He came to her not just for studying. He wanted to benefit from her authority and influence to ensure his family and friends would be safe. He told her frankly, "If you promise me you will protect them, I will enter the academy, and you will be my teacher." Judith was surprised by his frankness, and he had another condition. He told her he wouldn't enter the academy until he reached the official age because he wanted to be among people his own age. She asked him, "Why? That will delay you by 3 whole years." He replied to her, "I want to truly live my life, travel, be an adventurer, and tour the entire continent." She felt the decision was final, and there was no hope of changing his mind. She asked Arthur if he had told his family about this decision, and he told her, "No, I'm still going to go talk to them." She told him, "If you can convince your parents, I agree to all your conditions." But as soon as he returned home and told them he intended to be an adventurer, his mother became very upset and told him, "No, I don't agree." Reynold tried to calm her down and told her to listen to the boy, but she was completely refusing. He just returned after being absent for years, and I'm not ready to say goodbye to him again. Reynold tried to find a middle ground and asked her, "What if someone accompanied him? Would you agree then?" But she still refused. Here, Arthur intervened and told his mom, "I won't disappear like last time. This time, I will come back to you. I won't vanish." Arthur insisted that he would start going on adventures, but not continuously, meaning he would return home to visit them every few months. This calmed Estelle down a bit, especially when she found out he wasn't planning to travel right away. He told her he still had a month or two before leaving, but at the same time, Arthur felt he must explore the continent because there were many things he still didn't understand until now. Also, training alone had become boring, and he wanted to test his abilities in real situations. Estelle began to accept the idea a little, but worry was still evident on her face, so she asked him for a promise that he wouldn't hide anything from her. Arthur promised her he would be honest with her, but deep down, he knew there were secrets he had to keep from them for their safety. After that, Reynolds saw that Arthur must have a guardian or someone to protect him, because adventures are dangerous, so he went to ask his friends from his squad if any of them could take on this role. The problem was that he couldn't pay them any compensation, but he promised them he would find a way to repay the favor. But his friends told him they didn't need money, they were his friends and would stand by him regardless. Adam told him he couldn't do it, he was busy with work, and suddenly Jasmine raised her hand and said she was ready to take the job, which shocked everyone because they knew she hated protection work more than Adam. But she said, "If it concerns Arthur, then I agree." Reynolds was very grateful. Jasmine loved that boy, and he had just reached the light orange stage. Also, her relationship with Arthur was good, so she would be very suitable for this role. After they agreed, Arthur asked Reynolds to go to the auction to choose a sword, and Reynolds agreed and booked a spot for him with Vincent. The next day, Arthur met Vincent and told him he needed a sword for the adventure acceptance test. Vincent told him to look around as he liked. "Take your time, boss." But the number of swords was enormous, and he kept searching until the day ended, and he still hadn't found anything. Estelle began to worry about him and kept thinking about going to look for him. But Reynolds told her that choosing a weapon takes time, so it's better to wait a bit. During this time, Arthur was very frustrated. He saw hundreds of swords, but not a single one caught his eye. Most of the swords there were huge and suited for adults, and that didn't suit Arthur's small body. Even when he tried other weapons besides swords, nothing caught his attention. Suddenly, Sylvia caught his attention. The wooden stick was thrown on the ground. The moment he grabbed it, he felt it was much heavier than it looked, and it wasn't an ordinary stick. Rather, it had a sword inside it. With a bit of mana infusion, it glowed in front of him, and he managed to draw the sword from it. This was the first time he had seen a sword of this shape. He tried to strike with it a few times, and it felt heavy to him, but its quality was so high that it easily cut a barrel in half. But suddenly, the sword electrocuted him, so it fell from his hand. When he picked it up again, he felt something strange. The sword became perfectly balanced, and its shape and size became perfectly suited to his body. Arthur was very surprised by this sword. In his previous life, he owned many very high-quality swords, but he had never seen a sword so tailored to him. So he decided to try it again and struck another barrel with a half-hearted strike, destroying it easily. Then, Vincent, Reynolds, and James entered because Arthur was very late and asked if he had found the sword he wanted or not. But Arthur didn't want to show them the real sword because he felt Vincent might take it from him, especially as he began to realize how rare and top quality this sword was. So he quickly took a random sword from the shelf and said that was the one he had chosen. Reynolds tested the sword a little and immediately understood that there was nothing special about it. But if Arthur was insistent on it, Vincent told him to just take it. But Vincent noticed the stick Arthur was carrying on his side, so he asked him about it. Arthur quickly made up a story and said it was just an ordinary stick he found and intended to train with it lightly, and that it was nothing really. Vincent was surprised because he didn't remember having a stick like that in the storage, so he asked James to check its source. James checked the records and said that an old man had thrown it at him one day and said a strange sentence. "There is no suitable user for this thing. It's just a piece of wood, a useless stick." After that, they took it to several experts for examination, and they all said it was just a stick, but its shape was unique, so they stored it in the warehouse. Arthur begged them to let him take the stick with him, and Vincent agreed, especially since he couldn't do anything with it anyway. The following days, Arthur spent happily among his family and friends, and at the same time, he was preparing himself for travel. Suddenly, he found himself celebrating his 9th birthday. A big party was thrown for him, and everyone was there. After a while, everyone started presenting gifts. The first gift was from Alice. She brought him gloves with healing magic stones so that if he got injured, he could heal himself. After that, Vincent brought 2 rings, one for him and one for Alice. Her ring would glow if Arthur was in mortal danger, so she would be aware and know how to act. The last gift was from Adam, and it was a magic scroll that records sound so Arthur could record a message and send it home, and they could reply to him. Arthur thanked them all for these beautiful gifts and told them he would travel tomorrow and wanted them to know how much he appreciated everything they had done for him. Estelle asked him to be careful and told him she didn't care if he became strong or rich. She just wanted him to return home safely. At night, Arthur began to prepare his bag and all his things, and he was a little sad that he would leave them, but at the same time, he was determined to become stronger so he could protect them. And to achieve that, he must face new experiences and gain real strength. After finishing his preparations, he went downstairs and found his family waiting for him to say goodbye. Reynolds told him he was indeed strong, but he shouldn't deceive himself and act recklessly. At the same time, he told him they would always be proud of him, waiting for his news, and they were confident in him. He said goodbye to them and went out to find Jasmine waiting outside, saying, "Ready?" He said to her, "Let's go." The first step in the new journey. For Arthur to become an adventurer, he had to register officially as an adventurer, so he and Jasmine went straight to the Adventurers Guild headquarters to register himself and enter the rank determination test. Arthur had no idea how the procedures were done, but after he registered, a guild employee took him and gave him another room. Honestly, from Jasmine's perspective, he felt things were going perfectly so far. Arthur wears a mask as an adventurer so that if he gets into trouble or makes many enemies, no one can reach his family or cause them problems because of him. He also doesn't want people to judge his rating based on him being from a famous family. But at the same time, what classification is the adventurer Jasmine? She has a great soul too. Anyway, the two met Caspian, the guild leader, who told Arthur he had to take an exam, a theoretical exam, and a mana power test. But Caspian said he could exempt him from the theoretical exam since Jasmine was the one recommending him, and also because he knew her father very well. And since Arthur was wearing his mask and didn't want to reveal his identity, Caspian told him he didn't need to use his real name but had to choose a pseudonym. Arthur thought for a bit and decided to name himself Knut. After they finished the registration, Caspian asked them to follow him to the designated testing arena to begin his evaluation. As they were walking to the arena, Arthur asked Jasmine if she was close to the guild leader because it was obvious he was trying hard to help her. Jasmine didn't deny that she knew him but said he had strong connections. It was her father, not her. When they reached the arena, as soon as they opened the door, Arthur saw a fight going on between two mages in the middle of an evaluation exam. One of them was a young water mage named Diane, and the other was the trainer testing her. Diane used an offensive water spell on the trainer, but he deflected it easily, disappeared into the water vapor, and a moment later appeared behind her and hit her on the head lightly. The trainer praised her speed in casting the spell, but told her that her spatial awareness was very weak, and because of that, he gave her a C-class adventurer rating. Diane was already very happy with the result. Jasmine explained that what Diane did was a huge achievement for her age. The one after Diane was a guy named Hinata, but before he could do anything, the trainers told him to wait a bit. After a short discussion among them, they decided to let him pass without a test and announced that he was now B-class. Everyone was shocked by this sudden decision, even Jasmine and Arthur, but they had no reason to object, so the matter continued normally. After that, it was the turn of a boy named Lucas, and this boy was truly spoiled and very arrogant. Lucas entered the exam arena with excessive confidence and treated everyone around him as far beneath him. Although his arrogance annoyed the female trainer, she couldn't deny that the boy had talent. He was only 11 years old, yet he had reached the light orange stage of mana, which is nearly impossible at that age. Of course, this information wasn't for Arthur. Arthur noticed the pointed ears and remembered Tyasia and said to himself that this boy was from the elf race, but it was strange to see an elf inside a human kingdom. As soon as the exam began, Lucas raised his wand and began a spell to summon a fire guardian to attack the trainer, but the trainer used earth magic and destroyed it in a second. But Lucas didn't give up. He grabbed some rocks, struck them with his wand, and created a huge firestorm in the air. Its shape was truly dazzling, but it would have been more dazzling if he knew how to control the magic he was using. In moments, the fire went out of his control and was about to burn him, so the trainer had to intervene and use earth magic to put out the fire and save him from that situation. After it was over, Lucas was safe, and the only damage he suffered was to his pride. The trainer tried to be nice and praised him for his great strength, but he was very upset by the loss to the point that he didn't hear a word of her criticism. Instead of learning, he suddenly tried to betray her while she was talking to him. Fortunately, Arthur intervened and threw his sword at the right time, deflecting Lucas's spell before it reached the trainer. At that moment, she understood there was no use for a reckless boy like this. Even though his strength was enough to be B class, she downgraded him to D class because he had no self-control. As expected, Lucas got furious and started screaming and threatening that he would talk to his father, but the trainer didn't care, grabbed him by his clothes, and dragged him out of the arena like a little child. After that, it was Arthur's turn. He went down to the arena, taking the matter seriously this time, and decided not to hide his strength any further. Arthur's energy was so terrifying that the trainer took a defensive stance, and the guard was shocked by his power. At that moment, Caspian himself appeared in the arena and said that he would be the one to test Arthur. The trainer was surprised and told him that was a bit overkill, since Caspian was an adventurer of AA classification. But Caspian reassured her and said it was just a light training session, nothing more. He asked Arthur if he agreed to this, and Arthur, although he didn't expect to meet one of the strongest people in the guild on his first day, was honestly excited for the challenge. But unfortunately, if you were waiting to see the fight, sorry my friend, the scene was cut and we won't see it. After the unseen fight, Arthur was officially registered as a B-class adventurer, and thus he completed the first step in his new journey and was ready to start his life as an adventurer. At that time, the trainers went to the office. Caspian was there, and they asked him how there was such a large number of B-class adventurers this year, and all of them were young kids. Caspian replied calmly and told them that 6 months ago, a cultural exchange happened between the peoples, and although the news wasn't announced, some children from the other races received official certificates allowing them to work as adventurers. Lucas was one of them. Even though he broke the rules, he could be classified as B-class in the future due to his family's influence. But the strange thing was that Lucas's entire family was human, which meant that Lucas was likely born from an elf who was a servant in their household. As for Newt, the trainers had no information about him, and his promotion to B-class was done without an exam. This was because someone powerful was backing him and supporting him with his abilities, so Caspian couldn't do anything. The trainers asked who Newt's guarantor was, so Caspian explained that Newt was human but was raised in the Dwarf Kingdom and was sent here as their representative to acclimatize to the human world, and the guild wasn't allowed to interfere with him much. The last strange one among the applicants was Arthur. The trainers kept wondering why Caspian insisted on testing him personally, but Caspian said frankly that he had no information about Arthur. He didn't even know his real identity, but he was sure he wasn't a representative of any kingdom. Yet, he saw that Arthur definitely had very powerful people behind him, because the one guarding him was a daughter of the legendary Filmzor's family, and his way of using the sword was like a professional's. Caspian was very hopeful, because he saw that Arthur had a strong future, but currently, Caspian was still much stronger than him. As they were leaving the guild, Arthur began to think that he had been pulled strongly towards this world of magic, and focused heavily on his magical training, to the point that he neglected his sword training like before, so he felt his sword skills had weakened a bit. While he was lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into Newt and apologized to him. Newt told him that what he did was reckless, and that interfering in someone else's fight could put him in danger, but he admitted that he would have done the same if he were in his place, meaning regarding Arthur's intervention in Lucas's test. Anyway, as they were talking, Lucas suddenly appeared and joined the conversation uninvited. Arthur told him to back off because he didn't want to deal with a rule-breaking child like him. Lucas got angry and provoked him. He grabbed Arthur by his clothes and threatened to hit him. But since all three were classified as B-class, everyone in the guild was focused on them, so Lucas wouldn't be able to do anything without being held accountable. In the end, Lucas withdrew and left. Jasmine told Arthur that they were done at the guild and they had to move now, and she had a good idea for their first destination. She took Arthur and entered through a gate, and when he found himself in a vast green land called the Monster Pastures, the view was very beautiful, but Arthur felt the place was too quiet. Jasmine told him this place was for beginner adventurers who train and gather materials for their missions, but that wasn't their main goal, and she asked him to follow her. She said they would travel for a whole day to reach the place she wanted. Arthur was surprised by her speed, and at that moment, he began began to truly understand what it meant for someone to be an A-class adventurer. It was the same feeling he felt when he fought Caspian. Even though he knew Caspian was AA class, he thought he could beat him. And when he was defeated so easily, he began to reconsider and felt he had been a bit arrogant. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound came from within the forest, and moments later, a huge wild boar emerged from among the trees. It was enraged and mindless and began attacking the adventurers around it, literally swallowing one of them. As soon as Jasmine saw this scene, she grabbed Arthur and told him they had to run away immediately because a monster of that shape shouldn't be in this area. Something must be wrong. After running for a while, they found a destroyed carriage in the middle of the pastures, and this made it clear to them that some adventurers were transporting this monster alive, and it escaped from them. But Arthur didn't understand who would want to capture a monster of such danger. The boar saw them and started running towards them, so they had to take their lives in their hands and run too. They jumped quickly to avoid it, and then it tried to stab Arthur with its long tongue in a strange way, but they managed to escape again. The situation became very dangerous, so Jasmine told him to run while she dealt with it. She ran towards it at high speed, using wind magic, and managed to hit it several times, but in the end, she stopped, and the monster attacked her and was about to crush her. Jasmine managed to escape at the last moment, but lost her balance and fell. Arthur caught her before she got hurt. She thanked him, but there were still beginner adventurers in the monster's path, so she got up quickly and ran to protect them. The boar began to prepare for another attack, and Arthur wanted to intervene, but he remembered the lessons from his previous life and that he must not be rash again. He had indeed made a mistake today by overestimating his strength, so he decided to wait for the right moment to attack. The moment the boar focused on Jasmine and they began their attack, Arthur launched himself, covered his sword with fire magic, and struck the boar with a very powerful blow that finished it off right then. Thanks to Arthur's strike, everyone around him was safe, but Jasmine felt a bit frustrated because she was supposed to be his guardian and couldn't protect him well. She originally entered the world of adventurers to escape from her family, who had generations producing fire magic. There's no one like them. In the beginning, Jasmine was proud to be from that family, especially since she showed her mana very early, and they placed great hopes on her. But as soon as they found out she controlled wind, not fire, they turned the tables on her and said she was a disgrace to the family. Arthur got angry at that time and said her family was stupid and that there is no element stronger than another. Each element has its strength. Jasmine laughed out loud because she thought his reaction was very strong for someone who is always calm. But Arthur got angry because what happened to her reminded him of himself. In his previous life, he was always told he was useless, and no one saw anything in him. What her family did to her was very harsh, but since it happened, she managed to meet her squad and live a new life. At first, she didn't know how to cooperate with anyone or trust anyone in battle, but with time, God blessed her with people who taught her a lot, and even if they annoyed her at times, she knew they changed her for the better, and she wished Arthur was going through the same change. Arthur wasn't sure if someone like him could really change after all he had done in his past life, but when he remembered everything he had done since he was reborn and all the people he had met and who helped him, he decided he would try with all his might to become a better person and protect everyone who had become dear to him. And the story ends here, my friend. I wonder what awaits Arthur in his adventures. That's what we'll find out if a new part is released, God willing. You'll find it here on the channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe and tell us your opinion in the comments. Send blessings upon the prophet. I'll see you later, my friend. Goodbye.